Hari Om. Let's get started with our invocation.
सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावतीर्णमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। गीता ध्यानम्। ॐ पार्थाय प्रतिबोधितां नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रहीतां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम् अद्वैतामृतवर्षिणीं भगवतीम् अष्टादशाध्यायिनीम् अम्ब त्वामनुसन्दधामि भगवद्गीते भवद्वेषिणी। नमोऽस्तु ते व्यासविशालबुद्धे पुल्लारविन्दायतपत्रनेत्र येन त्वया भारततल्यपूर्णः प्रज्वालितो ज्ञानमयप्रदीप प्रपन्नपारिजाताय स्तोत्रवैत्रेकपाणये ज्ञानमुद्राय कृष्णाय गीतामृतदुहे नमः। सर्वोपनिषदो गावो दोग्धा गोपालनन्दना पार्थो वत्सत्सुधीर्भोक्ता दुग्धं गीतामृतं महत्। वसुदेवसुदं देवं कंसचाणूरमर्दनं देवकी परमानन्दं कृष्णं वन्दे जगद्गुरुम्। भीष्मद्रोणतटा जयद्रथजला गान्धारनीलोत्पला शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थामविकर्णघोरमकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सुकीर्ण खलु पाण्डवैरननडी कैवर्तककेशवा पाराशर्यवशः सरोजममलं गीतार्थगन्धोत्कटं नानाख्यानककेशरं हरिकथा सम्बोधनाबोधितम्। लोके सज्जनषट्परैरहरः पीयमानं मुदा भूयाद्भारतपङ्कजं कलिमला प्रध्वंसिन श्रेयसे। मूकं करोति वाचालं पङ्गुं लङ्घयति गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे परमानन्दमाधवम्। यं ब्रह्मा वरुणेन्द्ररुद्रमरुतः स्तुवन्ति दिव्यैस्तवै वेदे साङ्गपदक्रमोपनिषदे गायन्ति यं सामगा। ध्यानावस्थिततद्गतेन मनसा पश्यन्ति यं योगिनो यस्यान्तं न विदुःसुरा सुरगणा देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः देवाय तस्मै नमः.
So what we have seen till now in chapter 1 is that when one loses, anyone that loses their own identity with their own self, then they lose perspective. And essentially identity is what? Identity is nothing but awareness of who I am. My identity is awareness of who I am. Who am I? My perception of who I am in the context of the world. And if we lose that identity, then we lose perspective. And that then influences thinking, and that thinking influences action. So what happened with Arjuna when Sri Krishna took the Ratha in the middle of the battlefield, and where did he take it? Pramuthakaha. Pramuthaka, where right in front of Bhishma and Dronacharya, where Arjuna can make eye contact with them, with both of them. One of them his grandsire, the other his guru. So 5 things happened to him. The first one was wrong notion about his identity. Rather than standing in the middle of the battlefield, Senayo Ubhayo Madhye, instead of remembering that he is a soldier, he started thinking about his relations and himself as the relative of those people. So he tells Krishna, Drishtve Mam Swajanam Krishna. I see my people, Krishna. The second thing that happened to him was loss of perspective. So he started looking at Samupasthita, the people who are gathered there, Samupastitam, not those who are the subjects of his kingdom, the people who are dependent on him, who are maybe not in the battlefield, some of them may be there. He completely forgot about them. He just thought about the people who are gathered there in front of him, his relatives. The third thing was sorrow or Vishada. And he actually expresses his sorrow. We noticed there are 8 expressions and he talks about them to Sri Krishna. The first one was that my limbs fail me. The second one was my mouth is drying up. And then my body is trembling. My hair is standing on its end. I can't hold anything in my hand. My bow is slipping out. My skin is sweaty and burning. I'm not able to stand and my head is spinning. All these are the expressions that he felt initially in his mind and then were demonstrated as symptoms in through his body, mind and intellect, which then led to his misplaced intellect. He keeps repeating, that these are my relatives. He keeps naming his relatives again and again. And then he says, for whose sake? Yesha Marte. These are the people. For them we are fighting this war and they are here. They have given up everything. So what is the use of fighting the war for some people who are here? But actually it is not for them. That is the reality. Which means the 5th thing was he was deluded. He was in moha. And he was making logical arguments, but arguments that did not have any substance. And we saw that he made 3 powerful logical arguments. The first one was omens, that I see omens, nimittani. And nachashreyo, I don't see any good coming out of all this. This was his first argument, logical argument. And the second one was swajanam hi katham hatva. What is the use of killing our own people? That was his second logical argument. So what has happened to him because of this, because of his thinking about I and my, and because of getting that consequent sorrow and delusion, he forgot that the power and authority that he had, for which he was respected as a king, as a prince, as a soldier, all that was entrusted upon him by society. That is something that was given to him It was not something that he was born with. It was there because of his role that he was playing in the society. And from that role comes responsibility. And Arjuna forgot about all of this. And he started thinking as though the war was meant for him and his family to be happy. So it became very clouded in his own self perspective. His premise of my relations was completely wrong. If he had thought about, or had his premise been that I am an administrator, I represent my subjects have been wrong, and it is my duty, or it is our duty as soldiers, as commanders, to fight this battle. That is the reason they were all there. But he completely forgot about it. So one of the things that we all learned from this, a lesson for us, is that we should never get carried away with argument that is very well constructed, is supported by very good logic, but without a good foundation or a solid premise. Any argument without a proper premise is invalid. We will now recite verses 38 and 39.
यद्यपि न पश्यन्ति
यद्यपेते न पश्यन्ति
लोभोपहत चेतसः
लोभोपहत चेतसः
कुलक्षयकृतं दोषम्
कुलक्षयकृतं दोषम्
मित्रद्रोहे च पातकम्
मित्रद्रोहे च पातकम्
कथं न ज्ञेयमस्माभिः
कथं न ज्ञेयमस्माभिः पापादस्मान्निवर्तितुम्
कुलक्षयकृतं दोषम् प्रपश्यद्भिर्जनार्दन यद्यपि ते न पश्यन्ति लोभोपहत चेतसः कुलक्षयकृतं दोषं मित्रद्रोहे च पातकम् कथं न ज्ञेयमस्माभिः पापादस्मान्निवर्तितुं कुलक्षयकृतं दोषं प्रपश्यद्भिर्जनार्दन.
So, having forgotten that his own mind, his own intelligence is clouded by lack of perspective, he is actually telling Sri Krishna that look at them, their intelligence is clouded by greed. So he is making a judgment on, the Kauravas, the sons of Dhritarashtra, and the Kaurava army. And then he says, why should not we, who we clearly see the evil in destruction, we should turn away from all of this, O Janardana. He uses the term Janardana for Krishna. Janardana means protector of all living beings. So the terms that, Arjuna uses for Krishna, the names that he uses to address Krishna are very, very appropriate. You are the protector. How can we stand here thinking that we have to kill them? And Janardana also means worshipped by all living beings. So all living beings worship you, O Krishna. You are the protector of everyone, O Krishna. We should be clever. We should be better than they. They are the ones who are clouded. We are not clouded. Now, Arjuna, what has he done? He has deftly included Sri Krishna, as an accomplice. Till now, he was trying to explain his perspective and trying to convince the Lord. In fact, if you remember the last verse, where, he actually sang about, Swajanam hi katam hatva. Right? And there he was telling Madhava, you are also a family man, O Lord. There he used the term Madhava for Sri Krishna. You are also a husband. You also have a family. So he was appealing to Sri Krishna. Here he is saying we. So he's embraced him. You also are thinking. So he has made this assumption. Krishna has not spoken till now. So Arjuna is now speaking for Sri Krishna also. And he is including him, saying, we see the good. And then he has also, what has he done? He has taken his logical argument to the next wave. So he moved on from omens, that I see omens. He moved on from I don't see any good out of this. He moved on from the Swajanam argument, my and my own, to kulakshaya kritam dosham, destruction of families, and the dosha or the bad coming out of the destruction of families. So he has taken the logical argument to the next step. So his third wave of delusion is focused more on the society and the family. And he is saying that their minds and their intelligence is clouded by greed, lobha. And he says we clearly see it. And one wrong, just because they are doing a wrong, we can't also do a wrong. And their wrong cannot be outdone or overcome by we committing another mistake. So let's not commit this mistake. So he has gone to that level. We will see he further goes into families and society and the destruction and what that causes. So we will now read verses 40 to 44, all 5 verses together.
Kulakshaye pranashyanti.
Kulakshaye pranashyanti.
Kuladharmaha sanatanaha.
Kuladharmaha sanatanaha.
Dharme nashti kulam krishnam.
Dharme nashte kulam kritsnam.
Adharmo vibhavatyuta.
Adharmo bhibhavatyuta.
Adharma vibhavat Krishna.
Adharma bhibhavat Krishna.
Pradushyanti kulastriyaha.
Pradushyanti kulastriyaha.
Strishu dushtasu varshneya.
Srisu dushtasu varshneya.
Jayate varna shankaraha.
Jayate varna sankaraha.
Shankaro narakayeva.
Sankaro narakayaiva.
Kulagnanam kulasya cha.
Kulagnanam kulasya cha.
Patanti pitaro hesham.
Patanti pitaro hesham.
Lupta pindodaka kriyaha.
Lupta pindodaka kriyaha.
Doshe rete kulagnanam.
Doshe rete kulagnanam.
Varna shankara karakai.
Varna sankara karakai.
Utsadyante jati dharmaha.
Utsadyante jati dharmaha.
Kuladharmascha shashvataha.
Kuladharmascha shashvataha.
Utsanna kuladharmanam.
Utsanna kuladharmanam.
Manushyanam janardhana.
Manushyanam janardana.
Narake niyatam vaso.
Narake niyatam vaso.
Bhavatityanu
Bhavatityanu
Kulakshaye pranashyanti. Kuladharmaha sanatanaha. Dharme nashte kulam krishnam. Adharmo vibhavatyuta. Adharma vibhavat Krishna. Pradushyanti kulastriyaha. Strishu dushtasu varshneye. Jayate varna shankaraha. Shankaro narakayeva. Kulagnanam kulasya cha. Patanti pitaro hesham. Lupta pindodaka kriyaha. Doshrite kulagnanam. Varna shankara karakai. Utsadyanti jati dharmaha. Kuladharmascha shashvataha. Utsanna kuladharmanam. Manushyanam janardhana. Narake niyatam vaso. Bhavati tyanu.
So here Arjuna basically has taken his focus into what will happen to families, their destruction, and leading from the destruction of families, what will happen to the society? And he actually lists out that the result of all this would be that people will go to hell. And he lists out 8 steps in these 5 verses. So he says the result of war would be destruction of families. And in the destruction of families, good practices that have been followed by the families, the traditions that have been followed by the families, all of those perish. And when good practices and good traditions perish, impiety prevails, adharma, impiety prevails. When impiety prevails, the condition of women deteriorates in the society. When condition of women deteriorates in the society faces a lot of contamination and societal deterioration, and the caste as well as family related traditions get completely destroyed. And when that happens, people go to hell. Not only do people who are living go to hell, the people who have already reached heaven, they fall from grace and they come down to hell. This is how he describes it. So essentially, Arjuna has taken his argument to convince Krishna, saying we should not fight this war, we need to get out of here. And if we don't, this entire society is going to go to hell. Now, actually, when we go to chapter 2, Sri Krishna paints a very beautiful picture of hell, actually. And I'm consciously using the term beautiful picture of hell. He talks about hell as nothing but disturbances that are there within our own mind and intellect. That is what he refers to as hell. So we will come to that. We have to be patient when we go to the next chapter. We'll move on to verse 45.
Aho batamahat papam.
Aho batamahat papam.
Kartum vyavastita vayam.
Kartum vyavasita vayam.
Yadrajya sukhalobhena.
Yadraja sukhalobhena.
Hantum swajanamudyataha.
Hantum swajanamudyataha.
Aho battamahat papam. Kartum vyavastita vayam. Yadrajya sukhalobhena. Hantum swajanamudyataha.
So he says, Vayam, aho, alas. So this is an expression. And where he says, we have been involved and we are going to be involved in this great sin. And we all have together decided, we have taken our decision to be involved in this great sin, which will come from killing our own people, because we are greedy for the pleasures of the kingdom. And he is actually clicking his tongue. This Sanskrit is that way a beautiful language. Bata, he's like, he's clicking his tongue. What is this? What are we doing? We have taken this decision and we have collectively decided. And he says, who? All of us. Yudhishthira, my brother, the representative of Dharma. Yudhi Sthira, we talked about it earlier. The person who is firm in battle. He has taken this decision. Actually, in the Mahabharata, in chapter 21 or 22, Yudhishthira is the one who is, extremely despondent. He is in almost a sense of desperation, and he is experiencing all kinds of, ill feelings about getting into this war. And there it is Arjuna who is convincing Yudhishthira that no, this is something that we always wanted to do. We all through our 14 years of exile, we have prepared for this war. You sent me to the heavens to get all the weapons and obtain mastery in weaponry so that I can come back and be prepared to war. You, as my elder brother, you ordered me to do that, and I only listened to you. I went away from my family for such a long period to get the skills that I can have to prepare for and fight this war. And he said, we are doing this for what? We are doing this to regain our rights. We are doing this to avenge the wrong done to all our people, our subjects, people who depend on us, who we are supposed to protect. And now this person who argued with and convinced Yudhishthira is now in the state. Why is he in the state? Because of that feeling of swajanam, I and my, aham mama, shokha and moha. We'll go to verse 46.
Yadi mam apratikaram
Yadi mama pratekaram
ashastram shastrapanayah
ashastram shastrapanayah
dhatra rashtrarani hanyu
dhartarashtrarane hanyu
tanmeshe mataram bhavita
tanme kshetramam bhavet.
yadi mam apratikaram ashastram shastrapanayah dhatra rashtrarani hanyu tanmeshe mataram bhavita.
So Arjuna is now coming to the conclusion of his arguments. Okay, so he talked about my people. He talked about the bad omens. He talked about there's no good coming out of it. What good will come out of killing my own? And then he talked about the destruction of families, the destruction of society. Everybody will go to hell, and so on and so forth. And now finally he says he realizes he has said all this. Arjuna is coming into the realization that where is he? Senayo Ubhayo Madhye. And he ordered his charioteer Sri Krishna to take his Ratha to the middle of the battlefield. And he says, oh, here is where I am. I'm in the middle of the battlefield. And once there in the middle of the battlefield, once the war bugles have been sounded, if he decides that he's not going to fight the war, what will happen? He has only two choices. Either he has to run away like a coward, or he has to get killed in the battlefield. So Arjuna tells Sri Krishna, and he also knows that he's not going to be allowed, Duryodhana is going to allow him to run away. By the time he starts preparing to run away, he'll be killed. So he now knows that, you know what, I'm prepared to die. I'm going to get killed here. I'm now me without my weapons. I'm going to get killed, and I'm ready to get killed. That is okay for me. In fact, if I get killed here, that will bring material benefit. Shemattaram. That will bring material. Shema is material good. So it is better that I get killed here. And that will bring us material good. And he tells that to Krishna. So essentially, he says, I have decided not to fight this war. And when I've decided not to fight this war, I'm going to cast away my weapons. And after I've cast away my weapons, all these enemy soldiers and the sons of Dhritarashtra, they are armed. And if they decide to kill me and they kill me here, that is better than anything else. And it will bring material good to the society. So essentially, what has he come to? We talked about it. The last aspect of starting with the lack of knowledge or ajnana. He has come to Swadharma Nasha, which is dereliction of his duty. So he is saying, I am not going to fight. My duty is to fight, but I am not going to fight. So he has come to that. Wrong action, where he says, I'm going to cast away my weapons, followed by not doing one's duty. We will read the last verse, which is verse 47.
Sanjaya uvacha
Sanjaya uvacha
eva muktva Arjuna sankhye
eva muktva Arjuna sankhye
ratopasta upavishat
rathopastha upavishat
visrijjaya sasharam chapam
visrijjaya sasharam chapam
shoka samvigna manasaha
shoka samvigna manasaha.
Sanjaya uvacha eva muktva Arjuna sankhye ratopasta upavishat visrijjaya sasharam chapam shoka samvigna manasaha.
So Sanjaya Vacha, here Sanjaya is saying, Sanjaya is speaking here and summing up to his king Dhritarashtra, and he's saying that having spoken all of these words in the middle of the battlefield, Arjuna sat down on the seat of his chariot, casting away all his weapons, all his bows and arrows. And Shasharam means arrows. Along with his arrow, the Chapam means bow, casting away all of them, and with a mind which is distressed with sorrow. And he sat down. This is how Sanjaya describes. And who? The greatest of all warriors of his time. Someone who was incomparable in valor. And now his mind, inflicted and engulfed in sorrow, has just given up. So essentially, from greatest intelligence, from an extremely high level of valor to utter incompetence, the bridge for this, covering this gap, is sorrow. And Arjuna right now has successfully established that bridge. And Krishna has not spoken even one word all through this. Even though Arjuna has tried to convince him, pleaded with him, tried to include him in his arguments and his way of thought, he, like a good psychiatrist, Krishna has just allowed Arjuna to express himself completely, drain himself out. So completely, fully just allowed him to go on and on till the point in time where he himself quietened down. So normally when somebody is in sorrow, it's better to get to a point where you are exhausted and you quieten down. And with this scene, we come to the end of chapter 1 of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, which is Arjuna Vishada Yoga. So we will recite the final lines.
Om Tat Saditi Srimad Bhagavad Gitasu Upanishadsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Arjuna Vishada Yogo Nama Pratamodhyayaha.
So essentially what this signifies is, nowadays when you finish a chapter in a book, you have a particular, you like have a symbol, and then you have another chapter 2 with a heading that says chapter 2, and so on and so forth. In the olden days, there was no text, written text. All this was spoken. And when it was spoken, at that time, there had to be some kind of a symbol that marked that we have come to one benchmark, one end and beginning. The next will be the beginning of a new chapter. And that was marked by words. And these are those words. In the Upanishads, essentially, the last mantra or the concluding portion of the last mantra is repeated twice. Whereas in the Bhagavad Gita, the conclusion of every chapter is marked by the repetition of this epilogue. This is the epilogue, and the same epilogue is repeated. It is called in Sanskrit, it is called the Sankalpa Vakya. The Sankalpa Vakya is repeated in every chapter, and exactly the same Sankalpa Vakya is repeated, except there are two differences. The first difference is that there is a change in the chapter number, and the second difference is that the name of the chapter is recited. Other than that, it is the same Sankalpa Vakya. So Om Tat Sat. Om Tat Sat refers to the Supreme. We talked about Om very much in the beginning of our satsangs, right? In the first satsang. Om is a single syllable utterance of the name of God. And here Om Tat Sat is referred to, or is uttered to give completion. In a lot of Sanskrit texts, we will find this being used. Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su. Thus, iti is thus, in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Upanishadsu. Remember, we also talked about earlier that Srimad Bhagavad Gita is also regarded as Upanishad. In fact, every chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita is an Upanishad. Each and every chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is an Upanishad. Brahma Vidyayam. What do we get from these chapters? Brahma Vidya. And what is Brahma Vidya? Knowledge of the Brahman. What is knowledge of the Brahman? We all talked about this in our earlier satsangs. The Parama Purushartha is the knowledge of the Brahman. And that is what we get from here. So not just knowledge, because knowledge can be subtle. Knowledge may not be followed or understood by everyone. But we get what? We get Yoga Shastra. Yoga Shastra means that we get the instructions to follow to enable us to understand what we have to do. Specific instructions. If we read the Bhagavad Gita carefully, and like Gurudev Swami Chinmayananda ji said, we not only go through the Bhagavad Gita, but we allow the Bhagavad Gita to go through us, we will get specific instructions to do what we have to do in our context, not just what a story about what Arjuna did or what Krishna taught Arjuna. What can we do in our context, in our lives as we are living our lives? And that is the Yoga Shastra that is referred to here. And how is this given? Sri Krishna Arjuna Samvadi, a dialogue, a discussion between the Lord and the disciple. Sri Krishna Bhagwan and Arjuna the disciple, both of them are having a discussion in the middle of the battlefield. And then the last two are the particular chapter. Arjuna Vishada Yogo Nama. So the name of this chapter is Arjuna Vishada Yoga, or the yoga of Arjuna's sorrow. Another very interesting way, yoga of Arjuna's sorrow. We have talked about yoga being unison, yoga being the means through which we unite. And here we are saying sorrow being the means. So it is Arjuna's sorrow that were his means to unite with Bhagwan, with the Lord, who then became the one who was teaching him. So anyone who has sorrow, it is always better to express it to the Lord and unite with the Lord so that we find our own resolutions. Prathamodhyayaha, the first chapter. That's what this means. So thank you very much. With this, we are done with the first chapter. We talked about Upanishads. Upanishad, is beautiful. It's beautiful. Upanishad. So essentially, it means sitting next to a guru with a sense of reverence to learn. And that is what Upanishad means. And yesterday was Swamiji Chinmayanandaji's, Gurudev's 104th birth anniversary. And we are learning through his text and what he brought to all of us. So, let us mentally think that we are sitting next to him with reverence, learning the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Thank you all. We are done with chapter 1. Hari Om. So we can open up now. I had sent an email. I had sent an email with some of the concepts and thoughts that we can talk about. And you also can, express anything that you have. We have already discussed a lot about sorrow, delusion. We have talked about, the aspects of me and my dharma. And in addition to that, I also listed out a few other points on my email. So I will just open up to all of you to express and discuss, and we can take it from there. Great. Looks like not too many people have points. Last time there were lots of them. Today we set time for this, but looks like either we have full clarity or we don't have any clarity at all. One of the two.
Hey, Srini, we are supposed to recite Aarti also, right?
Sure, we can do. Okay, that's a good point, Deepak. Thank you. We will recite the Aarti right now and then we will go to the questions. Thank you. Sarika, we can recite. Go to the Aarti.
Om Jai Bhagavad Gita, Maya Jai Bhagavad Gita, Hari Kamala Viharini, Sundar Supunite. Om Jai Bhagavad Gita, Karma Sumarma Prakashini, Kama Saktihara, Tattva Jnana Vikashini, Vidya Brahma Para. Om Jai Bhagavad Gita, Nischala Bhakti Vidhaini, Nirmala Malhari, Sharan Rahasya Pradhaini, Sab Vidhi Sukhakari. Om Jai Bhagavad Gita, Raga Dvesha Vidharini, Tarini Moda Sada, Bhava Bhaya Harini Tarini, Paramananda प्रदा ॐ जय भगवद्गीते आसुर भाव विनाशिनी नाशिनी तमरजनी दैवी सद्गुणदायिनी हरिरसिका सजनी ॐ जय भगवद्गीते समत त्याग सिखावनी हरिमुख की बानी सकल शास्त्र की स्वामिनी श्रुतियों की रानी ॐ जय भगवद्गीते दया सुधा बरसावनी तातु कृपा कीजे हरिपद प्रेम दान कर अपनो कर लीजे ॐ जय भगवद्गीते ॐ जय भगवद्गीते ॐ जय भगवद्गीते
Uncle Sakshi here.
Hi, Sakshi.
Hi. So I was just going over verse 37. Now it says, Arjuna says that sin will overcome us if we kill or slay such aggressors. Now, on one hand, he's labeling Duryodhana as an aggressor, yet he's conflicted that sin will overcome us. Why label them? Isn't that sort of juxtaposing what he's saying?
Correct. And that is what he justifies later on, right? What we saw today. That where he says, they are clouded by their ignorance. They are clouded by their ignorance, which comes out of greed. But our minds are clear. We understand that this is not right and it is sinful. So let us back out. Let us take the doing. If somebody else is committing wrong, me committing a wrong will not make their wrong right, which is what he says. So he does continue to believe that they are wrong. But he says that just because they are wrong, I don't want to do wrong.
But that's his duty, no?
That's exactly the point. So, someone who was very aware of his duty, in fact, he argued with his elder brother and convinced him that this war was their duty and they must fight. And today, Yudhishthira is there in the battlefield with, staunch belief that he has to fight. But Arjuna is the one who has forgotten about his duty. And the reason he has forgotten about his duty is because of the shoka and moha that has come from the sense of aham and mama. And now we'll come to it, how Sri Krishna is going to make him realize again that, yes, this is my duty. And how is he going to help him overcome this state of despondency? He's now in the despondent state. He's in a state where he says, I'm going to die. He's in a suicidal frame of mind.
Right.
He says, it's fine to die. From that state of mind, Sri Krishna will bring him back up to a level where he's going to fight that war like the true warrior that he is.
Okay. And I had another question. How come the entire Bhagavad Gita is between Arjuna and Krishna? Why not Yudhishthira and Krishna? Why was Arjuna chosen?
That's a beautiful question. They say that, one Arjuna first chose Sri Krishna. Okay. When the war was imminent, and once Sri Krishna, before the war was imminent, Sri Krishna went to Hastinapura as a peace emissary and was insulted by Duryodhana, and he was ordered to be imprisoned by Duryodhana. And after that episode of Duryodhana's behavior, it was very clear that war has to happen. Okay. And once that was clear, both Duryodhana and Arjuna went to Sri Krishna to ask for his help. And also, Sri Krishna and Arjuna are supposed to be of similar age group. Yudhishthira is older, Bhima is older, Nakula and Sahadeva are younger. During their younger days, Arjuna and Sri Krishna have spent a lot of time together before any of this war was imminent and all. Playing around, generally spending time with each other, and so on and so forth, as friends, as buddies, right? But now war is imminent. And everyone also acknowledges Sri Krishna as a statesman, as someone who knows a lot more than the others. Some of the people already know that he is more special than normal human beings. He is, a representative of Bhagwan himself. He has done some feats in his life in the past. See, most saints across religions, most saints are recognized as saints because of, various feats that they have achieved that are impossible, superhuman feats that are impossible to normal human beings. So Sri Krishna has done all of that in his life. So everybody looks up to him. And, that is the reason both Arjuna and Duryodhana go to him to take help. And when they do that, Arjuna actually goes and stands by Sri Krishna's feet. Whereas Duryodhana goes and sits by his head. There is a chair next to his head and he sits by his head.
Okay.
And obviously Sri Krishna, when he opens his eyes, he looks towards his feet. And, he doesn't turn around to look who is at the side of his head. So he notices Arjuna and he says, "Why are you here?" And Arjuna says, "I'm here to take your help." And then he looks at Duryodhana, also says, "I'm also here to take your help, and I was here first. And I came here first, you talk to me first."
Okay.
So but Arjuna, Sri Krishna says, "You may have come here first, but I first saw Arjuna. So whoever I see first is who I'm going to ask." And I've already asked him what he wants. So then he offers them two things. He offers one of them himself without any weapons. He will not fight the war. Okay, he will only support by his presence. And he offers the other his entire army. And Arjuna, who is the first to choose, asks for Sri Krishna. And Duryodhana is very happy, and in his glee he takes, "I have taken the entire army." Okay, so Duryodhana gets the army and Arjuna gets Sri Krishna as the charioteer. So Sri Krishna becomes his charioteer. So that is why, when Arjuna commands his charioteer to take it to the middle of the battle, and it all subsequently follows. So it's all, it's all a result of, history, bonhomie between the two. They all have come. Typically, we'll find that, where we connect with somebody, we spend more time with that person. So a lot of that has come together. And then the aspect of coincidence that Arjuna is the one who wanted to inspect the battlefield. It was not Yudhishthira or Bhima or anyone who wanted to inspect the battlefield, inspect his enemy lines, and see who am I going to fight. It was Arjuna who wanted to do that.
So is that because only Arjuna was conflicted in his mind?
No, at that time he was not conflicted. When he ordered Sri Krishna to go, he was very clear that I am going to see who are these people who dare fight with me. So it was that Kshatriya, the soldierliness in him that said, "Okay, I'm going to review the enemy lines." That was the spirit in which he came. The conflict in his mind came only when he saw the eyes of Drona and Dronacharya and Bhishma, and when his eyes met with their eyes, and then he started feeling that, my God, my teacher, my grandsire. That is when the conflict entered in. Before that, there was no conflict. And after the Bhagavad Gita, that conflict goes away.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Hey Srini, this is Rohit here.
Hi Rohit.
Srini, today while you were giving the discourse, you did mention that at some point of time, Bhagavad Gita tells us what we have to do, in our lives. It teaches you that. And you did mention yoga of Arjuna's sorrow, after some time. Can you throw some more light on it, if possible, at this point of time?
So essentially, Bhagavad Gita is Sri Krishna's preaching, Sri Krishna's, using Arjuna as a source to bring his teachings to us. So Arjuna is just an excuse. It just happened that Arjuna was the one who was there in the Kurukshetra war at the time of Sri Krishna's living. But the context in which Bhagavad Gita is taught, and the context in which if we read the Mahabharata, and Rohit, before you joined, I had actually recommended the group that they should read the Mahabharata, and I also recommend Sri Rajagopalachari's Mahabharata. If you read
Sure.
that, you will find that a lot of the elements that are used, for example, the simplest one that we all have heard of, why 5 versus 100? 5 children of the King Pandu and 100 children of King Dhritarashtra. So all of these represent various elements, and the context in which Mahabharata is brought to us, and later on the context in which Bhagavad Gita, which is in the center of Mahabharata, is brought to us, is to help us face our own battles in our life in a manner that we can conquer them and use the teachings. And that's where not just the knowledge, it's also the Yoga Sastra. It is not only the knowledge that is brought to us by Sri Krishna, it is also how to implement, how do we go about, the tools to implement in a relevant context to us. And how is it done? See, Arjuna's life was the much harder. Can we say that any of our lives is as hard as Arjuna? Not really, none of us. Even in the Mahabharata, Arjuna's life is arguably the hardest of everyone else. Possibly a comparable person that comes close to Arjuna is Bhishma. Bhishma also had a very difficult life, okay? But Arjuna's life, just think about it. A warrior, an extremely vibrant personality, an ace archer, a brilliant soldier, intelligent planner, everything. I mean, imagine a person who could look at a reflection of a fish that was revolving and then shoot the actual fish which is above it, right? It requires an unbelievable amount of skill, presence of mind, focus, concentration, belief in himself, strength, courage, everything. That is the kind of guy. And then what happens? He in those days the custom was to wed. There is a the Swayamvara, and he wins Draupadi. Draupadi is his wife. Because of his mother's not paying attention, he actually has to share his wife with everybody else. Not that and by the way, if you read the Mahabharata, you'll see that Arjuna does not appreciate it actually. He really doesn't like the fact that he's being forced to do this. He has no choice. He accepts it and he lives that life, but he doesn't have a choice really, okay? He doesn't like it. Then his brother Yudhishthira, who, because he is a follower of Dharma, and we talked about it in the last class also, that sometimes when you follow Dharma and when you act for the higher cause, you have to make personal sacrifices. So the amount of immense personal sacrifices that the Pandavas made, okay? And Yudhishthira lost the kingdom, Yudhishthira lost himself, Yudhishthira lost his brothers, Yudhishthira lost his wife. Arjuna had to, endure all of that. And look at the conflict in personality. Yudhishthira at least had the personality to endure the result of his following Dharma. But Arjuna didn't have the personality to endure all of this. He had to do it because of his brother, because of the decisions and the steps taken by his brother. So all that was bottled up there. And then the way his cousins treated him, absolute, the Kauravas, Duryodhana especially, the way he was treated, the way his wife was treated, the way they were made to undergo ignominious, unbelievable amount of insult, all that is there in him. And then when they went to their, the exile, the last year of exile, Arjuna actually lived as a eunuch. Look at the contradiction again, the extremity in contradiction. A person who is a valiant warrior lived as a eunuch for 1 year, 1 full year. All these are severe repressions on his original personality. And those severe repressions on his original personality caused him to become extremely subdued, which then led to the psychological breakdown in the middle of the battlefield, right? So very, very difficult life. None of us come even close to any of those lives. Even the people who struggle, like today in coronavirus, we are blessed people. We can talk about being in isolation, but there are people out there who can't even imagine. They'll die of starvation if they don't work, right? So their lives are harder than ours, but their lives are easier than Arjuna's. So people in Afghanistan, and other parts of the world who famine oriented, Africa and some other places. Even we remember from our childhood, there was famine in India, but nowadays India has gone much beyond that. Humanity has become much more prosperous. But even the worst of human state today is much better than what Arjuna went through in his life, right? A person who had everything and had to live without anything. And that example is used, that if he can come out of it and if he can surmount all his troubles, then why is it that anybody else cannot? And we need to be intelligent enough to contextualize, take the knowledge and take the Yoga Shastra and then apply it in our world.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So Srini, but just to add to your argument why Arjuna, yeah, I also think that if one were to, let's say, this armies, if one removes Sri Krishna, then Arjuna is actually among the warring capabilities. He's the deciding factor among the two. So basically, this whole knowledge has to, or the whole convincing has to be done to him. And he was the one who brought, let's say, to this state. So, he is the informal leader. Though the formal leader is Yudhishthira, the big brother, but I think the informal leader is Arjuna, and therefore he has to be convinced. And so this is probably one more argument to why this knowledge has to come through Arjuna and not through Yudhishthira.
Absolutely, that's an excellent point, Deepak. I agree with you. Yes, he is the informal leader, and convincing the informal leader, everyone else is also convinced. In fact, in Mahabharata, among the most difficult tasks, for example, killing of Jayadratha, Arjuna is the one who is tasked with that. Killing of Bhishma, Arjuna is the one who is tasked with that. So all the difficult work comes to Arjuna. So yes, you are right. He is the informal leader.
Hi, Srini. In
Hi.
one of the points that you've listed, you're talking about the objective and the subjective mind, right? So does this refer to the conscious and the subconscious mind?
Thank you, Aditi. Actually, I was going to, if there was no further questions, I was going to myself talk about the objective and the subjective mind. So,
okay, and one more thing.
Yeah.
So can you explain this with reference to Bhagavad Gita, specifically chapter 1? Where exactly are we talking about the conscious and the subconscious mind?
Sure. So sure.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I would say that, see, the objective mind, so I will take us back to our introductory session, okay? Well, the introductory satsang. How did we describe the objective and the subjective minds? Remember the input-output process model, okay? Which we have also studied in science. So all of us are entities which have our body, mind, and intellect, in which our soul is captured or lives or dwells, and everything else which is not this body, mind, intellect, soul paradigm. Okay, so we or I is the subject, and everything else other than me is the object. Okay, so when this body, mind, and intellect, which is me, when I look at everything else which is not me, the first thing that happens is that the body part of it, the 5 sense organs, they perceive everything that is outside of me. And that perception goes through the object mind or the objective mind. Why? And that is the reason it is called the objective mind. So it is called objective mind because the plethora of stimuli that comes to us from outside, and that is seeped in, that is taken in through our sense organs, that first interacts with that portion of the mind, interacts with the mind. But that portion of the mind is the objective mind because it is completely exposed to the senses that come from outside. Then what happens? Then we have our own intellect, okay, our own thought process, our own buddhi, which processes this thing which has been imported from outside. Our own ego, our own desires, all of these things process what we have taken in from the outside world. And once that process has happened, then it again goes into the next part of the mind, which now is not only the what we seeped in from outside, but it is what we seeped in from outside plus my own impressions, based on my ego, based on my desires, based on my intellect, my own impressions. And that is the subjective mind. So actually the objective mind and the subjective mind is not the subconscious. It is what I just described. Okay. And then the subjective mind issues out instructions that the organs of action then, perpetuate to the world that is outside of us. So this is the simple process and the input process output model that it goes through. And that is where the objective mind and the subjective mind comes in. Now this aspect, and there's one more thing that I wrote in my mail, is this, the aspect of the union, the aspect of the yoga, that essentially what it helps when we do this yoga, which is described in the Bhagavad Gita, it cleanses, it removes those aspects of the ego and those aspects of the desires which are residing in our intellect that separate this objective and the subjective mind. And when the object and the subjective mind come together and they work in unison, then it's like when we say, I'm thinking from my heart and I'm thinking from my head. Okay. So there are various expressions of it, but essentially when the aspect of my interaction with outside and the aspect of my interaction within both come together and I work in unison, then I'm working at my best capability level. And that is how this process is there. And to your point about subconscious, yes, is majorly made out of the intellect, which essentially comes, how that comes is what are my inherent desires which are there in me. It is said that we are come into this planet with desires, which are there in our previous birth itself. Okay. We come into this planet with an element of ego. We come into this planet with an element of, that intellect which we carry in. And then over a period of time, it keeps through our experiences, through this input process output model that we just described, this keeps building up. It keeps working, through our various actions that we take, through the karma that we do, it keeps building up. These inherent tendencies are called vasanas. Okay. And these vasanas form much of the subconscious aspect. So all of this is, like the cauldron where the object aspect, the subject aspect, the vasanas, all of this works together. And ultimately uniting all of this into one single entity is where, we can ensure that our performance, our sense of being in the planet is much more efficient. And what is the goal of all of this? We talked about Jivan Mukti and Videha Mukti earlier, right? Jivan Mukti, Videha Mukti, we'll come to it later. Okay, that is freedom from the repeated cycle of birth and death. But in this life, can we live this life in an optimal manner, in an efficient manner, with happiness touching our core and happiness extending throughout our life? If you are able to live this life in that manner, that itself is Jivan Mukti. And a fundamental requirement for us to even start moving towards that Jivan Mukti is for our minds to be able to work together in unison. That yoga has to happen. And when that yoga happens, we will be able to proceed towards that objective of, being happy and attaining Jivan Mukti and living this life in an optimal manner. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Srini. Yes.
I appreciate Deepak comes up with these answers. So any of you who have experience and you can share, it's not just me who has to answer. Okay, so please do share if you know. There are lots of people in this group who are very well read. Please do step up and speak up and share your knowledge. I request you to do that.
Srini Aditya asked one more question, which is at the end. Where is the reference to this objective mind and subjective mind in chapter 1? If it is there, yeah. So
So there is allusion, there is a lot of, it is being alluded to. So when we touched upon Vedanta, that is where we clearly discussed the objective mind and subjective mind. Neither Sri Krishna nor later on, Sri Krishna will talk about all of this, by the way, not in chapter 1. Once Sri Krishna starts opening his mouth, we will get a lot of gyan. And till now, remember, he has not spoken a single word. And except, he has spoken a single word. If any of you can remember, you can tell me that, okay? He has spoken, where he said, Pasha, see, now I'm in the center of the battlefield. Look, you wanted to inspect, right? See, that is the only word he has spoken. Other than that, he has not spoken anything. So when he starts speaking, yes, he will give us all this gyan. Chapter 1, there is no reference to objective mind and subjective mind. But through our introduction, we established that connect, the concept, so that chapter 1 just doesn't become a entirely this Arjuna Vishada and and all of that. So there is no there is no direct reference to objective and subjective mind in chapter 1. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Srini, I think where we can actually think about the objective and subjective mind is when you explain how Arjuna is talking to Krishna, and apparently when we listen to those words, we are able to relate to what Arjuna is saying. We feel that what Arjuna is saying is correct, and it's something which is obviously happening in this world, and it is something that we have experienced in our own lives. So apparently that situation seems real. But if we understand the objective and subjective mind of ours, the explanation you gave to what Arjuna is saying and what the purpose of it is becomes very clear.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes. So it is alluded to, but with this context, it becomes much more clear. So thank you, Harini.
I just wanted to point it out for the person who asked that question so that they can remember, because I've always found that very fascinating. Unless and until you understand slightly deeper than what is obviously visible to us, what obviously we can understand in this world, it's very hard to understand fundamentally where Arjuna is going wrong.
True. Yeah.
Thanks.
And specifically, you can also say that Arjuna is only looking at it through the objective part of it. The objective lens. The sense organs look so. Sri Krishna is also very smart and very intelligent. Huh? He put the Ratha at a point where there was eye contact between Bhishma and Arjuna, between Dronacharya and Arjuna. And when that eye contact happened, Arjuna's objective mind, lights up. And he looks at his teacher. He looks at his, the sense organs start telling him who that person is and how is he related, rather than the subjective aspects. They're all clouded. So in first chapter, the objectivity part of it dominates actually. But one more thing, thank you, Harini, for switching on your video. So that's a nice gesture when anyone speaks.
Okay. So I have another question. You said in chapter 1, the objective mind dominates, right? Of Arjuna dominates. So are we saying that when the objective mind dominates, you are in a state of delusion? Because he is, isn't he?
True.
Yeah?
Yeah, is it done? Your question is done?
Yes,
yeah.
That's my question.
So,
yes.
Yeah, not really. I mean, see, we talked about how people get into the state of delusion. So if you recollect, what we said was more often than not, we also come in with our own delusions, but more often than not, what leads to delusion? The first thing that leads to delusion is that I have this rigidity of acting, of thinking within my own body, mind, intellect framework. Remember the my way or the highway concept that we talked about. So when people are rigid about their own views, which is framed by what? My views are framed by my body, my mind, and my intellect. The elements of my body, the elements of my mind, the elements of my intellect lead to my views. And when I get encapsulated in that, the first thing that happens, this encapsulation leads to ignorance about other elements which are not in this body, mind, and intellect paradigm. So in this class, if I just think about it from my point of view, there are 17, 18, 20 people who are other than me, and I just ignore that. So I'm ignorant to the aspects of the rest of the people in the group. So when we become ignorant to that, then it leads to a sense of aham and mama, I and mine. And that is exactly what happened to Arjuna, I and mine. And then that leads to sorrow. That leads to the concept of shoka, where once everything, if you start looking at it from I and mine, and why does it lead to shoka? Because when you start looking at everything from the paradigm of I and mine, you are ignoring the other paradigms. Obviously, it's not going to go your way. Things are not going to go your way. And the primary cause of shoka is when things do not go your way. If things go your way, you are very joyful. I didn't say happy, please note that. You're very joyful when things go your way. But when things don't go your way, you're not joyful. You're unhappy. And continued unhappiness leads to sorrow. So if I'm going to be in my paradigm and ignore other paradigms, I'm going to definitely face sorrow over a period of time. It is guaranteed. And that sorrow then leads to, and if I continue to live in that existence, so I am living in my I and my existence, the sorrow existence, which is the result of that I and my, and I continue it. I don't change even after that. Then I start believing that I have false misconception. I have a false belief. I have misconceptions that I am right, what I think is right. That is delusion. So delusion comes from I, my, sorrow, and then delusion.
Thank you.
Srini, I have one question, and I'm not really sure if I will be articulate it very clearly. But when Arjuna, so when we are saying that Arjuna is deluded with I and mine, he's talking about his relatives, his teacher, and all of that. And at the same time, we are also saying that look at what happened to Draupadi, or look at the way they were sent to the forest and all of that, right? So that is also so that there are two things. One is the I and mine. Arjuna is saddened by the fact that he has to fight against his teacher and relatives, but at the same time he is forced to look at what happened to his family and then so fight, right? I mean, so it's both are affected by, both parts are affecting Arjuna, right? But at the same time we are forcing, or the way it is advised to Arjuna is go and fight, right? I'm not really clearly able to understand that aspect.
Right. Actually, Anupama, this is a great question. It's a difficult question to answer. Let me tell you that. Okay. And so essentially, see, there are 2-3 elements to it. Arjuna is not only filled with sorrow because he has to fight his guru and his grandsire and other relatives, the sons, daughters. That's not the only reason. It is in the context of what he has gone through his life, which I described in response to Rohit's question. Look at his life over 30, 40 years. There is so much of suppression that has happened. And that then in this context, and one of the suppressions was what happened to Draupadi. See, Arjuna felt extremely humiliated and he felt extremely helpless. So for a warrior to be helpless, it's not even about what Draupadi went through, that he could not do anything to protect her. is a bigger problem for him than what Draupadi actually went. Okay, so all that suppression, and then in the middle of the battlefield, which is a stressful environment, and then he sees people who has taught him, people on whose laps he has played, and he, it's actually a case of psychosis, close case of neurosis, right? So he gets into that. So the point is, so what is it? Like I said, Bhagavad Gita gives us contextual learning. First of all, if we can be proactive enough to ensure that we do not allow things to go to this extreme, where we are suppressing our own personality to an extreme for something that we don't believe in. So proactive action to ensure that we don't take us to that extremity of suppression will help, number one. Number two is, by the way, Bhagavad Gita is not a treatise of war. It doesn't say go fight, go fight. Yes, the fact is that Sri Krishna uses these terms multiple times. He says, get up Arjuna, go and fight. Get up Arjuna, go and fight. He says this again and again. We will see that as we go forward. But it's not that Sri Krishna is encouraging a battle. It is that every one of us has to do our duty. And in that situation, given the background, given the history, given what had happened, at that point in time, the duty of Arjuna was to fight, and war was inevitable. Please remember, everything was done to prevent the war. But Duryodhana and party were completely, not willing to even give an inch of land, right? So everything was done, but nothing worked. That was number one. Number two is, what if Yudhishthira says, let's not have a war? What if Arjuna says, let's not have a war? What if Sri Krishna says, let's not have a war? Then you are allowing the tyrants to rule. And that is not the duty of a Kshatriya. So there is tyranny that has happened, and it has happened not for a few weeks or months. It has gone on for not a few years, but decades. Decades of tyranny. And the time had come to put it to an end. There was no choice. Sometimes when you have to act, you have to act. Even today, when a soldier, is in front of the enemy, you have to fight. When a corona warrior is in front of a patient with the virus, in spite of the risk that I as a corona warrior may get that virus, there's no choice. My duty is to perform what I have to do there. So what Sri Krishna says again and again is not for him to get up and fight. It is an encouragement and a push for Arjuna and everyone else to do his or her duty.
Okay. Thank you, Srini. Yeah.
And the duty is for something bigger. So in our context, our organization. In Arjuna's context, his kingdom, his people, his subjects. He is the king. And in our context, it could be our family, it could be our organization, any holistic unit. For that, we do our duty. And as long as we act for something which is bigger than us, then it leads to success in the long run.
Okay.
Okay, great. I think we are also close to the time. So if no further questions, we can close here. Anything else? A last call. Great. Thank you all. Hari Om. We will see you next Saturday.